the News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Wednesday, July 3rd, the day before the July 4th. And I hope you have some things planned, perhaps, as we observe our nation's independence. We're going to take phone calls this morning and get into a lot of what's happening, not just with regard to the 4th of July, but maybe some other things happening politically, both in Washington, D.C. and around the country, and what's happened recently overseas with regard to President Trump, the Democratic challengers and their debates, the planned 4th of July celebration tomorrow in Washington, D.C., which I'm just going online here and going over and over about all the things that are going to be happening tomorrow in D.C. and how big and what the president would like to have done, and maybe your take. If you'd like to sound off or share a thought on some aspect of the 4th, we'd love to hear from you. The number 737-7587, and our guest this morning is John Weil from over at MTSU. You know him. He's been on frequently this program, political science professor and the like. Nice to have you on, sir.
Good to be here.
You're a good guest for a lot of reasons, one of which it ties in with the 4th of July because he brought props and stuff, and you are. Yeah, bring
my
that
friend
over there
Mr.
in front
Jefferson
of us.
over here.
You've got a figurine. Well, I'm not sure if she here. Pull it over
Okay,
here.
well.
Can you pick it up?
Bring it up.
Oh, no, she's got it. She's got it. She's got it.
There we go.
There you go.
There we
at first
go.
I was like, wait, is that Alexander Hamilton?
No.
That is Thomas Jefferson holding the Declaration of Independence.
Yes, it is.
Pretty neat. And you, of course, an author as well, and A Constellation of Great Men is one of your more recent books, right? Exploring the character sketches of Benjamin Rush, who is one of those who signed.
He's a medical doctor who signed the Declaration.
And the Declaration of Independence, America's first founding document in U.S. history and culture. Again, this is more a reference book, correct?
I was going to say A to Z, but I think it only goes to W.
To W,
yes.
W. But a book like that, and again, just showing that today, and you are a established author as well as professor, but the Declaration of Independence, worth talking about that.
Absolutely.
Independence Day, right?
Yes.
I mean, I wonder, we all study it coming up through school and the importance of it, and I'm just wondering, with your students that you deal with at MTSU, and I mean, have things changed in any way with regard to how students learn about the Declaration of Independence these days? And I think so often, unfortunately, and what I see in the news is that people tend sometimes to almost still now these days take their freedoms for granted.
I think that's true.
We've always had it, so we take it for granted.
I took a group over spring break to historic sites in Virginia and Washington, D.C., and one of the places we went was the National Archives. The copy they had, the Declaration, is very faded, but I think certainly those students, we took 20 students with us, had a pretty good understanding of this. I found it very fascinating this week that Nike canceled a shoe with the Betsy Ross flag, and unless I'm missing something, it's because in 1776 there were slaves. Well, there were all kinds of injustices that were going on, but there's still a beauty in the idea that all men are created equal, that they're entitled to the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that government is based on consent, and if government isn't serving our purposes, that we have a right to change it.
Yeah. I agree.
They're enduring principles.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about the Betsy Ross flag. I'm not as schooled on that part of it. Now, I've seen it, and it's got the 13 stars of the original.
Yeah, and it's not actually, as far as we know, Betsy Ross, contrary to legend and contrary to pictures and whatever, actually did not do the American flag, or at least not the first one. But yeah, I mean, it's simply a flag with the 13 stars. And one of the things I've also done an encyclopedia on the American flag, and one of the things that we forget is the flag was anti-monarchical. In Europe, the emphasis would always center on one person, the Sun King, or the anointed. And in America, we had a new constellation where effectively all the states are equal, and there is no, we've had strong leaders that have emerged, but they're not hereditary leaders. They're subject still to popular choice.
Right. Okay. And so that Betsy Ross flag, and again the Nike, and we can even talk about that some, is stimulated some controversy. Yeah, they were going to have this shoe that came out. And I don't know what kind of thought they put into it, one way or the other, on what reaction might be. And then, of course, one of their spokespersons now, or not spokespersons, pitchmen, is Colin Kaepernick. And many of them know him from taking the knee, former San Francisco 49ers quarterback, and pitching some of their shoes. And the word was that he brought up, and then they started looking at it, that this flag maybe, because it's not a racist flag, meaning that what it was at the time, but it happened to be at the time, it's the 13 original states, is that right? Or,
exactly.
Yeah, and that at the time there were slaves, so by putting that symbol on there, the connection to it, they decided
to pull back on it. Almost every document in American history or symbol that we've had.
Kaepernick bringing that up, and then others may be saying, well, this is a shoe then that might be reminiscent or reminding folks of a difficult time and racism and all this, and so they pulled the shoe, which, Nike...
Of course, there were African Americans who were fighting for American independence, and they actually constituted about 10% of Washington's army, so they actually had a pretty vital role in that conflict.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I don't know. Nike's all about the bottom line and monies, I'm sure. And by them bringing this up and releasing the picture and then pulling it back, it's kind of a self-inflicted wound of them. They should have put in the thought, either do it or don't.
Right.
And then they backed off on that. But a lot of people upset because they say, well, that's the history. Now, do you view that differently, that flag, the Betsy Ross flag, differently than the Confederate flag?
Probably so. I mean, the American Revolution, there were certainly slaveholders, including Mr. Jefferson, but it wasn't fought for the preservation of slavery in the way that, and of course there were other factors in the Confederacy, including states' rights and a lot of other things, but it fundamentally, according to their own vice president, it was to be a society based on inequality. Based on racial supremacy. And, and again, I will say, I don't think the Confederate flag necessarily means that for everybody. Some people look back and they see ancestors who fought in a cause for which they believe. But I think it is a little bit more provocative, certainly, than, the 13 stars, we now have 50.
Right. But it's just the evolution of the American flag. But I can tell you this. There was no discussion in Nike's boardrooms of putting a Confederate flag on a shoe.
No, I'm sure that's
So there
true.
is a difference. And for whatever reason, they certainly did not see the Betsy Ross flag as being in the same ilk as the Confederate flag. That they just weren't going to put that on that shoe. And this other one, anyway, that's the kind of things. And some say, well, it's too political correct, and others say it's offensive to some, and they made their call, and consumers can decide what they want. Now, as far as the 4th of July tomorrow, I keep reading, and it seems like they're updating more and more of what the president has planned for the big 4th of July celebration. I think we all enjoy a good celebration, and Nashville certainly puts on a fantastic one downtown here.
Absolutely.
But what is the controversy in your mind over what the president's doing? And he's certainly not the first one to say, let's have a big celebration in D.C.
I think part of it is the military emphasis. He apparently came up with the idea for this visiting France when they were having the Bastille Day celebrations. And to some people, France is certainly not a big military aggressor today, but when you think of the countries that associate their primary holidays with military parades, they tend to be Soviet Union or today's Russia or China, North Korea.
I was going to say North Korea. Yeah. When I see a parade in North Korea, I see that idiot leader up there, and then all of these missiles and these people just marching in step down the and I look at that and I'm like, I'm sorry. I know there's nothing wrong with maybe celebrating the power of your military, as we should, and be proud of it. But to that kind of show, it just, to me, is...
What's fascinating about this is that there are actually some historical parallels, particularly in the early years of the 1800s. When people celebrated the 4th of July, they tended to do it either as Federalists, Mr. Hamilton, or as Democratic Republicans, Mr. Jefferson and Madison. And one of the things that probably broke the logjam is on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th of 1826, both Mr. Jefferson in Virginia and Mr. Adams in Massachusetts passed away on the same day. And there were a lot of people who said, at heart we really are all Americans, whatever our partisan associations would be. And I think there's some genuine fear here, particularly if if it's a Democrat or if it's a Republican Party giving out all the VIP passes, that it's moved less from an American celebration to a Republican celebration.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think there would be people who would justifiably be concerned if it became a Democratic celebration as opposed to an American celebration.
And I agree. I think it should be an American celebration. It is interesting, before we go to the break, and we're taking some phone calls in, we'll get to you in a moment. I'm trying to remember the last time I recall seeing a large turnout of military hardware in D.C. for some type of celebration. It seems like after Desert Storm and General Schwarzkopf, I don't know, was this around the 4th, but I remember down on the mall, they did bring down a lot of the military hardware on display after the successful show of how things went in the Middle East. Do you recall that? Was that Desert Storm after
remember
that? Or?
The one speech that Bush gave aboard the aircraft carrier, mission accomplished.
But this was under his father prior to that, I think, where they brought it in. And I remember they were upset because, not because of the showing of the military hardware, but it chewed up a lot of the grass on the mall.
Yes. It's pretty common, after major world wars and conflicts to have sort of a celebration.
And I understand that. So anyway, but the president has it big tomorrow, and he's going to be giving a speech, and it sounds like there's going to be a lot of fireworks, and hey, it's Independence Day.
Absolutely.
We'll take a break on that note. When we come back, we'll take some of your phone calls. As you can see, we're kind of hopping around here. At some point, we'll talk about presidential politics as well, not just the Republican side, but the Democrats' debate and how that's shaping up in this early going, and fundraising. Millions and millions of dollars being raised on both sides. So what are your thoughts? Day before the 4th of July, Declaration of Independence, National Politics. He's John Weil. He wrote this book, among others. Give us a call. Let's talk. We'll be back with more right after this.